China just blocked a resolution to reopen the world's most important oil route, the same route that carries its own oil. That's not a mistake. That's a message. On April 7th, 2026, inside the United Nations Security Council, something happened that most people walked right past. A resolution came to the floor proposed by Bahrain with one stated goal: restore freedom of movement through the Strait of Hormuz. 11 countries voted yes. China and Russia said no. Within hours, Western headlines had their story. China protects Iran. Russia shields a destabilizing regime. Simple, clean, wrong. Because here's the thing, nobody stopped to ask. China buys more Iranian oil than any country on earth. A massive share of it moves through the Strait of Hormuz. If that route closes, China bleeds. So why would China be the one killing the resolution to fix it? That question is the key to everything. And once you answer it, the whole picture changes. If you've never seen geopolitics explained this way before, you're going to want to stick around. And if this kind of analysis is what you're looking for, hitting subscribe takes 2 seconds and means you won't miss the next one. Let's go back to the room because the vote itself is only half the story. What matters is what was inside that resolution. Buried in the original draft were 3 words that carry enormous weight in international law: all necessary means. In diplomatic language, that phrase is not just wording, it is a door that lets any country walk through it with weapons, with ships, with legal cover from the United Nations itself. That's not a peace resolution. That's a war authorization dressed in neutral language. Multiple countries pushed back hard. China, Russia, and even France said the draft went too far. So it was revised. The aggressive military language came out. The resolution got softer, then it was revised again. More language stripped, more authority removed. By the third version, this was a significantly weakened document. China and Russia vetoed it every single time. Now ask yourself something. If this was really just about protecting Iran, why did they keep saying no even after the aggressive parts were removed? The answer is not loyalty. The answer is strategy. Here is the framework that explains everything China does in foreign policy, and almost nobody in mainstream media ever mentions it. China has one deep structural fear. It's called the Malaya Dilemma. The U.S. Navy controls several of the most critical maritime choke points on the planet. At any moment, theoretically, Washington could squeeze China's energy supply by locking down those routes. For decades, Beijing has treated this as its biggest long-term vulnerability. Now imagine that same risk extending to the Strait of Hormuz. If the United States steps into that waterway, pushes Iran into submission by force, and does it with a UN Security Council stamp of approval, what has just happened? America has proved in front of the entire world that it still controls who gets energy and who doesn't. That even in 2026, with all the talk of American decline, Washington can still flip the switch on the global oil supply. For China, that outcome is not just bad, it is the nightmare scenario. So the veto was not about protecting Iran. It was about making sure the United States does not walk away from this crisis looking like the unchallenged master of global energy. One move, one word, enormous consequences. Now here's the layer that most people completely miss, and it may be the most important one. Since the 1970s, oil has been traded in US dollars. That single fact is the engine of American financial power. Every country in the world needs dollars to buy energy. That creates permanent global demand for the dollar. And that demand lets America run massive deficits, fund its military, and keep its financial markets dominant. That system is called the pro-dollar, and it only works when oil flows smoothly through routes like the Strait of Hormuz. When that route stays unstable, the oil doesn't flow cleanly. The dollars don't cycle back into American assets the way they normally do. And countries that were already quietly asking, do we still need the dollar? Start asking that question a little louder. China has spent years building the answer to that question. UN-based oil trading systems, alternative payment networks, deep energy deals with Russia and Iran that bypass the dollar entirely. In a stable world, those systems sit on the shelf. Nobody needs them badly enough. But in a stressed world, in a world where the Strait of Hormuz is a source of chaos, those systems suddenly look very attractive to a lot of countries. China did not create this crisis. But it clearly understands that every week it continues, the pressure on the dollar-based order grows. And every crack in that order is an opening for the alternative China has been quietly building. The most common pushback sounds like this. Fine, but China is still hurting. It can't survive without Hormuz oil forever. That's true, and China knows it. Which is exactly why China spent the last decade preparing for precisely this situation. Strategic petroleum reserves built up over years give China time. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor gives it a path to the Arabian Sea that doesn't depend on traditional choke points. Overland energy routes connecting it to Russia and Central Asia reduce its exposure to any single maritime lane. And at home, China has been building solar, wind, and nuclear capacity at a scale the world has genuinely never seen before. Not just for climate reasons, but for strategic independence. Compare that to Europe, Japan, and South Korea. All heavily dependent on stable maritime oil flows, far fewer immediate alternatives, much thinner buffers. So when you ask who gets hurt more by a prolonged Hormuz disruption, the honest answer is not China the most. China planned for this. Its rivals mostly didn't. This is not an accident. This is preparation meeting opportunity. China's ambassador to the UN made one argument above all others after the veto. He said the resolution did not address root causes, that military strikes were carried out against Iran first, that the resolution then sought authorization to use force against the same country, now responding to those strikes. Whether you agree with that framing or not, something important happened when China made that argument publicly. A large portion of the world across Asia, Africa, and Latin America heard it and nodded because many of those countries have watched a pattern for decades. Force first, justification later, action first, UN resolution second. And they have grown deeply skeptical of how international rules get applied, depending on who's doing the applying. When China stands up in that chamber and says rules must apply equally, it is not speaking to Washington. It is speaking to the 80% of the world that has often felt those rules did not apply equally to them. That's not just diplomacy. That's a long-term campaign for trust. And trust in geopolitics is a form of power that takes decades to build and lasts longer than any military advantage. Step all the way back now. For decades after the Cold War, the United States operated with a kind of freedom no country in history had quite managed. It could intervene, sanction pressure, and shape outcomes around the world. When it needed international cover, it could usually get it. Russia was weakened. China had not yet risen enough to meaningfully push back. That era is now visibly over. On April 7, 2026, the United States went to the most powerful international body on Earth and asked for authorization to act in a crisis it considers vital to global stability. And two countries looked at that request and said no, not on a technicality, not through delay, through a direct, deliberate veto. That is a structural change in how global power works. There are now real enforceable limits on what America can do through international institutions. And that shift will outlast this conflict by decades. China achieved this without firing a single shot, without deploying a single soldier, without spending billions on a military campaign. It used one tool, the veto, at the exact moment it would cause maximum strategic effect. Militarily, it shaped the battlefield without entering it. Economically, it kept pressure on the dollar system while its own buffers absorbed the shock. Politically, it positioned itself as a defender of sovereignty rather than an aggressor. And in terms of global narrative, it gave a compelling voice to the skepticism that much of the world already felt. 4 dimensions, one move. essentially zero direct cost. Now, here's the honest version of the pushback. China cannot hold this position forever. The oil disruption is real. The economic pain is real. At some point, Beijing will need the strait open too. All of that is true. But the question that actually matters in strategy is never can you hold forever. It's who runs out of time first. America is spending interceptor missiles that take years to replace. It is spending political capital with allies who want stability, not prolonged confrontation. It is spending the domestic patience of consumers watching energy prices climb. These are not unlimited resources. Iran has lived under sanctions and pressure for over 40 years. Its entire strategic culture is built around endurance. It does not need to win fast. It only needs to avoid losing fast. And China, absorbing real but manageable short-term pain, watches the clock run in its direction. The veto did not end this crisis. It extended it, and in extending it, it shifted the cost, the economic cost, the political cost, the credibility cost, primarily onto the American side of the equation. That is what made it so precise. Not dramatic, not loud, just effective. Years from now, when historians look back at this war, they may not point to a bombing campaign or a naval battle as the turning point. They may point to a room in New York, to one raised hand, to one word. No, because sometimes the most powerful move in a conflict is the one that costs you nothing but changes everything. If this gave you a different way of seeing what's happening right now, if something in this analysis made you stop and think, wait, I never looked at it that way, then do one thing. Share this with one person who's only getting the headline version of this story. Not because you want to argue with them, but because they deserve the full picture too. Because here's the truth. Most people consuming news right now are not getting analysis. They are getting a take, a prepackaged, sideshows, narrative-fitted take that tells them what to feel before they've even had a chance to think. And that's not their fault. That's just how the information system is built right now. But you don't have to stay inside that system. What we do here is different. We don't pick a side and then build a case around it. We start with the facts, follow the incentives, and let the structure of the situation tell us what's actually happening. Sometimes that conclusion is uncomfortable. Sometimes it challenges what you thought you knew. Good. That's exactly the point. Because the world is moving fast right now. Wars, economic shifts, power changing hands in ways that don't make the front page. These things are happening whether you understand them or not. The only question is whether you want to understand them while they're happening or read about them in a history book 10 years from now. If you want to be in the first group, hit subscribe. It's free. Every time a major global event breaks, you'll get the real structure behind it, not just the surface noise. And the next one, it's already coming.